Yeah. Hey, guys. Welcome to Remnant Radio. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. For those of you who are new, we are a theology broadcast. Today, we're interviewing Bob Roberts. We're talking about multi-faith conversations and dialogue. It's going to be an exciting episode. Make sure to stay tuned. But if you're new to the channel and you want to know a little bit about us, we're a theology broadcast. We interview pastors and teachers from all over the world, from different churches and denominations, every single Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Times. We disagree with some of our guests. We agree with some of our guests, but our ultimate goal is to challenge our presuppositions in the scriptures so we can better understand God's word and the God who's given us his word. To my left, to your right, I have Michael Roundtree, who is back from vacation. Before we introduce Bob, Michael, how was vacation?
Vacation was awesome. Went to the beach, dug sandcastle. I went to the beach and dug for hours and hours with a shovel, but it was wonderful.
I love it.
Yeah, so had a great vacation, nice and relaxed. It's good to see some of our viewers commenting and welcoming me back. I feel like I came home. So to our new studio.
Literally home and home.
Yeah.
So what did you miss out on since you've been gone?
Well, what I missed out on is, for one, Dr. Carmen Imams was with us talking about biblical lament. I know you talked about had a pretty profound impact on you that episode. And so
that was good.
If you've ever just read those Psalms and just how sometimes depressing they seem, like she's going to really explain that for you and actually why it's an important part of God's word. And so really powerful episode. You also had two separate episodes where you talked about the Nicene Creed, the Chalcedonian Creed, and so
you hesitated because you're not sure if it's Chalcedonian or Chalcedonian.
I hear it
like
said
all
both
of us.
ways.
I don't know.
I know.
I don't either.
So, and then this week we got a big week ahead of us. We have 4 episodes this week. Have Jimmy Evans from Gateway Church tomorrow, going to talk about the pre-trib rapture. A few shout outs to all you pre-trib raptureites, because we've been having like all these not pre-trib rapture people on the show, and our viewers are like, I know,
hey guys, it's only fair.
So we've got some representation for the pre-trib rapture folks tomorrow. William Lane Craig is coming on to talk about atonement theory. He has a big book that's coming out where he's talking about that, and I think we're going to focus specifically on penal substitutionary atonement the most, correct?
PSA, that's it.
Yeah. Oh, PSA. You
PSA all the way.
So
sorry.
Okay, and so those are a couple of them. There's one more tomorrow night, Wednesday night.
Yes, John Thomas.
John
has not
Thomas
yet been
from Stream
scheduled
Ministry.
on YouTube. He's from Stream's Ministry. If you're familiar with John Paul Jackson, he took over his ministry when John Paul graduated to be with the Lord.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna
chop it up. Full week, but man, I'm so excited. Bob Roberts about the episode today with Bob. Pastor Bob has been a mentor to me, and not just to me, but honestly, hundreds of people around the world. And honestly, you can go around the world, you're not going to find somebody with as unique of a ministry as Bob. I mean, there's just a very unique fingerprint, which tells me, Bob, you really follow the Spirit of God, because when you're following him, it's not cookie cutter, and your ministry has not been cookie cutter. So Bob, why don't you just take a moment, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your ministry.
You know, it's funny you mentioned John Paul Jackson. I met him once in 1991, and I didn't even know what prophets were. And he gave this prophetic word over me in California that I would swing 2 swords. And I kept that with me. And
Wow.
it's what my life has wound up doing. So there's one sense in which I'm a pastor. I do the regular stuff that we all do together. And there's another sense in which I'm in the public square. And I'm working with people that are non-Christians. I work with governments, World Economic Forum, all kind of different groups, doing all kind of crazy stuff. So it's interesting. I enjoy it. Grew up Deep East Texas, very conservative, Baptist fundamentalist, Southern Baptist, cool, but we thought they were too liberal. So I mean, we were pretty rigid. Never related to other religions. That was the Methodists down the road. You know, Catholics, what were they? And then Muslims, I don't know, but we sent missionaries for them. And, racist culture. Black people didn't go to white churches. There was one guy that, for whatever reason, they let him come because he wanted to. My dad was an incredible expositor. He wanted to hear him. Mm-hmm. So he'd come to my dad's church. So my dad pastored First Baptist Lindale. So that may not mean anything to you guys, but that's where David Wilkerson and Leonard Ravenhill and Keith Green, those are the people I had to preach to growing up when I was starting to preach. Of course, we weren't in their tribe. We were Baptists where everybody was going to hell and you couldn't speak in tongues. That's a bunch of malarkey. But they came to my dad's. No, but they were my dad's. They came because they loved my dad's preaching. Wow. Huh. So I guess that had a bit to do with it, being exposed to lots of different kinds of people and loving them. But anyhow, that was my background. Very rigid. That was
so
it.
a little bit different from what it is right now.
Yeah, it's radically different.
Talk to us about this multi-faith thing. What does this even mean? I'm sure a few of our viewers get a little nervous when they hear that phrase.
So I like the word multi-faith because I work with people of other religions. And so I work with imams and rabbis and Buddhist priests and Hindus and everything all over the world. And a lot of times we have real challenges in how we relate to people of other faiths. We get confused about our faith. I'm very conservative in what I believe. I'm evangelical. I believe Jesus is the only way to God. He made it clear, I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one comes into the Father but by me. But the problem we have is not with what Jesus said, but how we live that out. And the truth of the matter is, we don't know how to relate to people of other faiths. And so the only way you do that is interfaith. Well, no good evangelical is going to be a part of interfaith because it's, kumbaya, all roads lead to heaven. Well, I don't believe that. And so how do we relate to people of other faith where we don't see them merely as evangelistic projects, but as human beings, believe it or not, created in the image of God? How do we do that? If I say multi-faith, that means I'm not compromising my faith. So I'm not asking you to compromise your faith. That's great, what you believe. I disagree with you. Let's talk about it. But it's a way of saying, I'm not going to compromise my faith, but neither am I a bigot because I believe what I believe. I'm just going to be nice about it. So here's what I like to say. I'm an evangelical. I'm just not mad. I'm happy. I actually like Jesus.
What is that?
And I like people. And see, here's the thing. This is a big deal. When I was raised, when I saw a person, I was taught to look at that person. You know what I'm looking at? I'm looking at two of them right now. Sinners. You're sinners.
Yeah.
And Catholics taught us original sin. What did Calvin teach us? Total depravity.
Original sin's even worse than the Catholics
we
said.
are messed up. So when we see one another, our first thought is sinners. Does that mean we're not sinners? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But when I see someone first now, do you know what I see? I see Genesis 1. Somebody created in the image of God.
Amen.
So I get to speak at mosque and at synagogues, and I've spoke at the Passion Conference for Muslim kids. It's called something else, not Passion, but they have their Louis Giglios and all this stuff. And I got up and I started out my talk. 20,000 of them. I said, I want you guys to know that I'm looking at 20,000 people that are created in the image of God. And there is something sacred within you. And I'm here because I want to connect with that sacredness.
Wow.
And they listen.
So talk to us about this transition from kind of deep, super conservative church, very fundamentalist to where you are now. What brought this about? I mean, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So and stop me because I can get to going too much too granular. Just say quicker, Bob. But what I did was what started it all. I wanted to be a missionary, and so I remember telling my wife before we got married, "Look, if you can't be a missionary, we don't need to get married." Immediately, she felt the call of God telling her to be a missionary, and so we did. We got married, and that was our plans. And I graduated from seminary, went to Fuller Seminary, got my doctorate in missions. So excited about it. But sadly, couldn't get appointed because she'd been in a car accident and there were some health reasons and health issues. She was going to have all these surgeries all her life. She didn't have to have, but it was God's will because he held us here. And so I started Northwood, the church I pastored just down the road from you. And when I did, God just would not let this thing about the world go. And so I thought in a very traditional missiological thing. By the way, the biggest shift in the world that needs to take place right now is how we see the world. I think we evangelicals get in the way of missions. We don't mean to, but we do. Anyhow, couldn't be a missionary, so what do? So our church adopts Vietnam. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. This was in the early 90s. I wanted to go somewhere like Hawaii or somewhere where they needed the
natives
Lord.
in Hawaii need you.
Hey,
They need
why
the gospel
not?
too.
Why not? But we had a helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War, shot down 3 times, survived all 3 times, came back to the Metroplex. I led him to faith in Christ, and he said, let's go to Vietnam.
Wow.
I said, man, I don't want to go to Vietnam, all those little commies over there. But we went over there, and through a fluke, somebody accepted Jesus that was child of one of the top leaders in the whole country. And so he asked me one day when I went to get permission to literally baptize their child, he asked me in a car on the way to the airport, he said, why would any intelligent man believe in God? Now, he'd been to, Moscow and so forth, and highly educated. He's in the news all the time. And so I went through 7 philosophical reasons why I believe God exists without the Bible, 5 philosophical reasons why I'm a monotheist, and 4 philosophical reasons why I believe Jesus was God. And he said, that's brilliant.
That's another podcast
episode,
it is. By the way. You can come back.
So we did. I went through it.
743.
Yeah, 754. 754.
754.
And so he said, would you share this with my friends? So I said, sure. So I'd never met with world leaders before. And so these were government ministers and just a lot of significant people. Went through it again, and they said, hey, would you bring some Bibles and start meeting with us? I said, I can't do that. And they said, why? I said, well, the government won't let me. They looked at me and said, well, Bob, we are the government. And they were. And so somebody with the Ministry of Health was there, and they said, we could use help with clinics. Do you have doctors and nurses? And I started thinking, okay, yeah, we could do that. Somebody else said, we need schools. Could you help? And so literally what we've done for almost 30 years in Vietnam, we've done over 160 projects, spent millions of dollars. Well, at the end, and we worked with the government. We went through the front door. I didn't sneak around. I couldn't. I mean, I was outed in the biggest way that you could be outed. And so it forced me to relearn how I related. And I discovered they didn't care whether I was a Christian or not. What they wanted to know was, what value do you bring to us? And so 4 or 5 months ago, the Vietnamese ambassador was at our church, and I'm friends with all these commies, and we talk about Jesus, and I speak at their stuff, and they're my friends, and it's cool. Well, after 9/11, we were asked to do the same thing in Afghanistan. I said, I don't feel the Lord calling me to do that. I mean, I've already got used to those red commies. I don't want to mess with Muslims. They'll chop my head off. And so finally, after a lot of prayer, I agreed to do it.
Yeah.
And so I grew my beard out real big. Prior to that, didn't grow much beards, but I grew my beard out real big, and got with some Pakistani mercenaries, and we traveled across the desert to a particular city, met with the governor. And there I told him, I said, look, I'm Bob Roberts. I'm a Baptist pastor from Texas. Maybe that's not the best way to do it, with the governor of Afghanistan, of a particular area. But I learned in Vietnam, be transparent, be open. And, you got to be ready to die or go to jail or God do something really cool. And I was counting on God do something really cool. And so I got to know him, and he said, thanks for telling the truth. He said, I can work with you for, you're honest. So long story short, we did this one big project together. It was a kids' hospital, raised a lot of money for. And in the context of that, this tribal leader, what we call warlord, for a huge part of the country, he's my age, we had done this dedication for a hospital building. He said, Bob, you like to hike? I said, yes. I was always talking to him about the mountains. He said, we were finished with our work. I show you Afghanistan. And so I looked at the guy beside me and said, is it safe? He said, no, it's not safe. You're in Afghanistan, but do you know who he is? And I said, no, well, he's the guy on CNN you see in America, and he works with our military, yada, yada, yada. He said, you'll probably be safe. So I said, okay. So I got in his SUV. He sat in the front seat and put a little machine gunner by him, put me in the back seat, catty corner, put a little machine gunner by him, put a little guy in the back compartment with a rocket launcher, and we headed across the desert. It was a blast. And, I've hunted deer.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no, it was a blast. But I learned you have never lived until you've gone camel chasing across the desert. Yeah. It was a cool experience.
I've never lived.
It's fun. So we'll go do it.
Okay.
So I began to get nervous. I said, because you got to be honest with the pastor too about who you are. If you don't, you can die real quick. So I said, did the governor explain to you who I was? And he said, yes, you're humanitarian. He said, did he explain I'm a Christian? He said, well, you're American, you're Christian. I said, okay. Did he explain to you that I'm a pastor? What is pastor? Doesn't understand. Finally, the equivalent in Islam is imam.
Right.
So I said, well, I like imam. He said, no, imam, you laugh too much. I said, no, I really am. So he said, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. Now, keep in mind, I've learned to work with communists. I know nothing about Islam.
Yeah.
Nothing. I'm just there to serve the people. So I'm making a big mess and laughing and having fun along the way and trying to stay alive. And so he takes me and we eat 10 o'clock at night in the middle of the desert. Then he claps his hand and out of nowhere comes about 15 or 20 young imams and one very old imam. And he said, "This is my friend Bob Roberts. He is a Christian imam. Ask him anything you want." And so we sat up until 2 a.m. They wanted to know about my Bible. So I literally got out my Bible and for 4 hours went through every book in the Bible, explained how the Bible is put together, what it is, how to become a Christian. It was I felt like Paul with people who'd never heard the gospel before. So anyhow, they started arguing about something. And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, I've told them how you've done this project and they want a school." So I asked him, I said, "Well, what if," and I began to pray. I said, "God, I don't know if this is right or not. These are imams. I mean, I'm a Christian. I want to fulfill the Great Commission. But I also know you're not going in these villages unless you work with them." So I asked him, I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. What if I get you your own Christian imam from America, your imams, I'll get a Christian imam, a pastor, and together we'll build one school for each village and one clinic for each village." And I prayed. I remember thinking about it, saying, "God, if I'm doing a sin by doing this, let a little jet pass over and blow me out. But God, I believe this is a door you've opened." And their first question was, "Are there American imams, pastors, who would work with us?" And my heart broke because here's what I saw. These are supposed to be the baddest of the bad, and they want help. They're willing to work with American pastors. What do we American pastors want to do? We want to go preach somewhere. You know, they want a school. They want a school. And when you read Acts, it's amazing how many priests kept coming to faith in Christ, and it keeps growing. And I used to view imams as gatekeepers. No, they're people who are interested in the gospel like anybody else. And so it worked. And we did all these projects. The next thing you know, I was asked to speak at the World Islamic Forum with the Brookings Institute. And I made a statement. Y'all may find this interesting. In working with the Muslims, I definitely believe in the second coming of Christ. I don't believe, I'm not a dispensational premillennialist anymore because I find it problematic with evangelization. It's like saying, I love this group of people more than I love this group of people. Sure. And so when I began to look at that, I thought, wow, what is that? And so I just made the little statement in front of everyone. I said, I want you to know, as an evangelical, I support the Jews, and I always will. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I equally support the Palestinians just like I support the Texans because we are all people of God in all nations. Amen. Well, you would have thought I said I became a Muslim. And they said, and the next thing you know, I get to be friends with all these princes and a lot of other people and working around the world. That's it. Too long of a story.
No, it's a great story. I love it. So with the context, people are listening right now. They're hearing, okay, what he just described sounds like evangelism. What's the difference between this evangelism and what you would call multi-faith? It just sounds like it's evangelism to a religious group opposed to an ethnic people group.
I would say evangelism is the heartbeat of the entire Christian life. Don't think of evangelism as a method or as a tool. Think of it as an ongoing, lifelong conversation.
Okay.
That's critical. Because, see, people don't want to be evangelized. They don't want to be converted. They don't want to be projects. But, man, they want to have a conversation with you.
So Scott McKnight came on the show, and he talked about the King Jesus gospel and how the gospel is not, what's the word he used? It's a bit salvation-based.
Yes.
What is the word?
It's soteriological, but he was... I can't remember. He had a phrase.
It sounded like
he
sectarian.
Kind of manipulated that word.
Yeah, but it's like it's people who make the gospel entire
soterian.
Yeah, so the soterian gospel is a gospel that's entirely about salvation. Where he's like the gospel, the good news is about Jesus, who is the Son of God, who is a Messiah, who's the fulfillment of Israel's story. It's this long drawn out picture. It's not. It certainly is about salvation, but it's so much more about the person of Jesus. So when you're talking about this interfaith. This is just having opportunities to proclaim the gospel in these different groups. How about the other group of people who are like, okay, that sounds like evangelism. Another group of people who are like, hey, like that friendship with the world is enmity with God, right? They're hearing you say like, hey, we're just going to befriend all these Muslims. Like that's not a good thing.
Yeah. So I would say two things to that. I would say, number one, there's a lot of paradoxes in the Bible. I've been studying this concept of what does it mean to be an exile?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we're told to live in community. On the other hand, we've also told that the kingdom has begun and heaven has started here. Mm-hmm. It's going. I mean, it's not when we die. The journey has now begun. The kingdom is not when Jesus comes back. That's just another dimension of it added to it. So I would say two or three things. I think key is, number one, you've got to see people as the image of God. Mm-hmm. Number two, you got to love people. And this is where preachers, I think, get it all wrong. We view evangelism as me standing up and just talking and preaching and
That's right.
doing
Monologue.
a really great, and it's inside the building. Mm-hmm. And so we bring your lost friends, I remember, here's how I was raised. Preachers would get up and they'd scream real loud. It's all about Jesus. It's not about Buddha. It's not about Muhammad. It's not about any of that. It's Jesus. And everybody be clapping and go, yeah. But there weren't any Buddhists or Muslims or anything present.
Sure.
And so they're being hateful and disrespectful. And it's, we're the right ones. I think the more you believe Jesus is the way, the more humility it demands.
Good.
So that you look at someone as the image of God. I want to listen to you. You know what I tell people? Here's a good way. People think you're crazy for being friends with all these people. And by the way, do they accept Christ? Yes. But you know what? I don't tell their stories. That's up to them.
Yeah.
Do they not accept Christ? Yes. And guess what? I stay their friends, even if they don't. Is there anywhere in Scripture it tells me, okay, they accepted Christ, you really love them, they didn't, be done with them? Do you do that with your kids that aren't Christians? Do you do that with your parents that aren't Christians? If we don't do that with our own families, and why don't we do that? Because we want them to know God, because we love them. Even if our children or our parents never know God, we are never going to give up, and we're always going to love them, and we're not going to preach to them every time we say, well, no, how's your kids? How's your work? How's your life? They matter to us. Here's the reality. People don't matter to us.
That's good.
They're preaching objects. And the best preaching that you will do, see, I've learned most evangelistic sermons don't preach to lost people. They're soteriological sermons on how a person accepts Christ instead of who is Jesus and what he matters. So I think, and why he matters and what he wants to do in our life. Let me just give you a quick example. So I spoke at the World Economic Forum, and they had me speak on the value of faith. And it was the Middle Eastern region, a couple of thousand people, King Abdullah, all of these top leaders from there. And so when I spoke, I only had 7 minutes. So I, Luke 9:23, I said, I'd like to share with you a verse. Jesus said, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself daily, take up his cross, and follow me. So now I want you guys to understand, when we Christians read that, what that means is we've got to be willing to give our life for Jesus. And that's true. The only thing was, when Jesus quoted this verse, he hadn't been to the cross yet. But they would remember that he was going to the cross. Mm-hmm. What was he saying? He was saying, if you're going to follow me, I want you to love people like I love them. I'm going to die for people that are not going to accept me. But I'm still going to go to the cross because they're in the image of God. I love them. All right? Mm-hmm. And I said, why am I here today? You guys matter to me. I said, do I want to baptize every one of you? You bet I do. I'd like to start with King Abdullah right out at that baptismal site just down the Jordan River here. But you know what? Whether you ever accept Christ or not, you know what? I'm going to love you guys.
That's good. Because
you matter to me. And let me just be clear. I'm always going to talk about Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's what I told them there. And then I talked about, but here's the value of faith. If we're people of faith, then there's moral issues that we can work together on.
That's right. Yeah.
You've got refugees here, millions of refugees that are in tent cities, or just a few miles from here. And we talked about this. I think another issue that we don't understand that's just huge, we don't get public faith. Mm. If you read the book of Acts, it's just the story of Paul doing all his stuff in public. We think about we're going to have evangelistic meetings and invite your lost friends. That's not what Paul did. When we're in the public square, we're invited to their meetings. It's not come to our meetings. So
It's
what does
we go to
Paul?
theirs.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
that's
does
good.
Paul do at Mars Hill? What does he do? At Ephesus,
In the
he's
synagogues.
invited to
That's right.
their meetings, and he stands up and he gives a brief witness as to who Jesus is. And I love to do it. I tell our young pastors all the time, "You've not lived till you've preached in a mosque." I love it. I'd rather preach in a mosque
And you get
or a
shouted down in
synagogue.
a mosque. It's
No,
much different than getting
chase
shouted
cattle
down.
you
in the
will
guys at
not
church.
get shouted down. Do you know why?
Well, I meant like getting
no,
amen,
but most people think, "Oh, that's scary. They're going to kill you." No, they won't.
Yeah,
They're human beings.
that's good.
And they are fascinated by. I remember the first time I spoke in a mosque, I was scared to death. They asked me to speak on the spur of the moment, But it's fun talking to people about Jesus that never hear it. Now, you could have a Muslim night at the church and invite all these Muslims to share the gospel, or you could go to the mosque at the invitation of the Imam and share the gospel.
Yeah. I actually got to speak in a mosque because of you.
Oh,
Did
cool.
I ever tell you that?
No.
So you had a retreat for pastors and imams to
Yeah.
get together and just kind of talk. And it was very much like this. We said outright, like, hey, we've got our beliefs. Our beliefs are different, but we're just going to talk through it. And I made a friend, one of the other imams there, and I mean, he straight up said to me, he said, "I'm sorry, I would just have a whole lot of trouble worshiping a God who murdered his son in order to forgive you for your sins." It just sounds kind of a weird way to forgive, which, by the way, we'll be talking about on Wednesday with Dr. William Lane Craig.
Shameless plug.
But so we talked through some really hard issues in the Trinity and man, when you talk through the Trinity with a monotheist who comes from a different perspective, it makes you have to think about it in ways you haven't typically had to think of it.
Yeah.
And so that started conversation. So then we started going to lunches and talking, and then so one day he invited me to his mosque, and I spoke to him, and he said, "I'm going to share 5 reasons why Islam is better, and you can share 5 reasons why Christianity is better." So I got to do that because of you. It was pretty cool.
And was he nice to you?
Super nice.
So now we've done 15 of those retreats, representing over 200 churches. So generally young megachurch pastors we do that with, and imams. Over 200,000 people are tied to those churches and mosques and synagogues.
So BJ Allen, who is a regular viewer of ours, he asked a question. He said, serious, not critical for Bob. How does he keep it from turning into a let's all get along meeting? Which I would assume for the beginning of the video, when you talked about the difference between multi-faith and interfaith, how do we keep that from kind of bleeding into the same thing? But before I have you answer that question, we're going to do a quick word from our sponsors.
All right. Sounds good.
Hey guys, the song you're listening to, Refining the Quality, is spot on. And if you haven't checked out StoneBridge Worship, just go over to your Spotify channel and type in "Worthy is Jesus." That's the song you're listening to right now. Right now. We are now? Okay.
All right.
That's a good shackle right before the live. Okay, so BJ's question, how do we prevent it from becoming multi-faith for interfaith?
Well, that's up to you, and you shouldn't. Don't do that, BJ. What's wrong with you, man? I mean, you got the good news of Jesus. Here's what people freak out
You
over.
haven't lived until
Yeah.
you've kept it multi-faith.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. You need to hang out with, pick your flavor, man. Who lives around you? Who do you work with? A Muslim, a Jew, a Buddhist? Just get to know them. See, we have the idea, I got to be an expert in that religion. No. How do you think the early church exploded? You had all of these experts of the different religions? Not at all. The church exploded because they were in relationships and they were talking about what Jesus did for them. So what I would say is keep it about Jesus. Just be happy. Why, when we start talking about God, do we go, whoa, 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 whoa? Don't do that. Just be nice. Be nice. Be like your mother. Be kind to people. And just talk to them normal. Don't get upset.
So Bob, let me ask you, on that note, why is being nice so controversial?
I don't know.
People don't like me
I
being
don't
friends
know.
with Anglicans
It's
and
caused you
Calvinists.
some problems, hadn't
Yeah,
it? Haven't
I
you
know.
had some people leave your church over it or get mad at you and write angry tweets at you?
We lost hundreds of people. Someone said, I don't want to be going to the Muslim church because we'd start having, the Muslims would come. I mean, Saudi Arabia has sent some of their top imams to visit our church to see what a Christian worship service is like. So, I'm excited about that.
Why do
'Cause
people
you
not want that?
I don't know. I think what they want, here's the thing. They want their culture,
Yeah.
not the gospel. And they've been raised with the gospel looks like this, and it's tribal. We're living in an incredibly, that's why we can't talk to one another, disagree. Wouldn't it be fun to talk about all the different views? I think y'all do. About the second
Occasionally.
coming of Christ?
Yeah.
I mean, why do people have to get mad at one another? Oh, what's wrong with you? Why do we have to be that way? Something's wrong with us on the inside if we've got this message, but we can't be kind about it.
It's like we're more passionate about drawing our lines than we are about reaching across them.
It is.
Yeah.
And I've had to learn, when I get to speak, I had this friend who spoke at an event with me. I got him an invitation. It made me sad because he's a phenomenal speaker, but he was so worried about what Christians were saying. He was exact in every word that he said, so he couldn't be criticized. The problem is he didn't connect with his audience.
Yeah.
And so when I'm with Muslims, I'm always talking about, I'm real close friends with this guy named Imam Majid. We go all over the world together, and we do these retreats together where Christians can't get along. And so, we'll sit up and talk about grace till 2 a.m. It's fun. By the way, neither do people understand all the good that can come out of relating to the faiths. I get to help Christians get out of prison. I get to help churches get built. We were in one particular country, and at the end of the retreat, the imams apologized to the pastors and said, we're the reason you've not had your church built. We are wrong, and we're going to let it get done. I'm going back in a few months to make sure they've let them build the church. But we see stuff like that all the time. And can you imagine the difference?
Oh, yeah.
When you walk into a country where people are in prison, they're Christians. I'm a Christian, and I say to their Muslim leader of a nation, you need to let those Christians out. How's that going to go over? But what if I walk in the room and I'm just there, and there's a leading imam, one of the top imams in the world, in America for that matter, and he says, listen, this guy believes in religious freedom for Muslims even though he disagrees with us. What you're doing to those Christians is not right, and it makes all of us look bad. He said, you need to stop embarrassing yourself. Do you realize the difference in what's going to happen? See, what we don't realize is when we're hateful to other people, it has a huge impact. When you're hateful to Christians in America, Muslims in America, what do you think it does to Christians in Pakistan?
What are some of the ways in which, because there's different manifestations of hate. Probably most of your church members aren't just like, even the ones who left, who probably weren't just like raging, hateful, like obviously racist people. What are some other ways in which it manifests?
I think in wanting to be around people, I think that's one of the ways that, no, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be a part. I don't want to, I don't want to take the time to get to know someone. I think that's one of the ways it does. I think another is, Twitter makes me so sad. Social media does sometimes, because I listen to pastors say horrible things.
Oh my
and I'm
gosh,
going,
it's embarrassing.
Don't you realize the whole world is listening? I listened to one pastor, he was upset that they weren't letting the churches meet. And he said, if I was a mosque, I guarantee you, you'd let us meet. And I thought, dang, man, there's all these imams that are watching you. Why would you say something like that? So I think a lot of times we're careless with our words. We're careless with our words. And we don't love people.
So it seems to me, and this isn't really question related, so forgive me, but
anything.
It seems as if that there is a tendency and a desire within Western evangelicalism to stir up our own base. To get those hearty amens, like you said, like when you were a kid, going to your church, getting the whole group to shout amen and hooray, so that we feel real secure about ourselves. But all the while, we feel insecure about what we believe and aren't able to talk to other people. How much of this is actually, you said that we don't have to know everything there is about another faith. How is it that Christians are going to feel secure enough? Because this seems like an insecurity problem. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
to
it
say,
is.
hey, like I'm right, they're wrong. I can't even have a conversation with an Anglican because they're of a different denomination. And if I have the conversation with them and call them a Christian brother, you know what I mean? What is my church going to think as a pastor? Like, I mean, these are things that we get asked regularly because they wear pointy hats in the Anglican church, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are we
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
do? They look kind of Roman
Yeah.
Catholic.
Sure.
So there seems to be a deep level of insecurity, and how are we going to kind of circum that insecurity without, I guess, awareness, or being, because people are wanting to be either specialists, over secure, or they're completely insecure and they can't talk about it. Where's that balance?
So here's what, let me describe it this way. I think this is where the fruit of the Spirit comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody wants the gifts of the Spirit. You know, that means nothing without the fruit of the Spirit. If this represents the whole of Christian theology from here to here, when I graduated from seminary, I had positions on everything. I had to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got a degree from seminary. I'm supposed to know
That's
it.
right.
Even if I didn't know what
Fuller.
it was, if that's what John Piper believed, that's what I believe, because
It's good
even
enough
if
for
I
John
can't
the
explain it,
Baptist.
all right? But here's what happened. As I got involved in people, do you know what my theology did? It actually did this. It shrunk. All the speculative stuff that I really don't know,
Yep.
that conservative scholars will argue over, I chunked it. And instead of my theology doing this, it did this. It went to the core, and it went deep. So the Trinity is everything to me.
That's right.
It's the divine community of
Speaking
God.
my language.
It's what God wants us. Where it's community, it's family, it's love. Who Jesus is everything. The Word of God. So it went deeper, and those are the things that matter. Who is Jesus? What was his message? What does it mean to live in community with one another? Let me tell you something else that happened. When my theology did this, my love of people did this.
That's good.
It just inverted completely. And I think I think we get intimidated by other people, and we shouldn't. Let me tell you a quick story. Is it all right?
Yes, please.
Okay, quick story. So we did this thing with the Pakistani Muslims. We said, look, we'll watch out for Muslims in America. We'll protect their religious freedom, but we want you to protect the religious freedom of Christians in Pakistan. Would you do that? So we came up with a pledge and everything. We agreed to do it. And
Great.
it went phenomenal. We had imams to start circling churches when riots would happen. And we had all kind of incredible things that have happened as a result of that. This is Pakistan, mind you.
Wow.
So anyhow, we have this big ceremony at the National Cathedral in D.C. And so there's all these muckety-mucks that are there. They flew over all these imams. Some of them had been extremists from Pakistan. Some of the pastors came with them that they had protected. Incredible experience. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Right before they have a little green room, even at the National Cathedral. So we're back there, those of us that are going to speak, getting ready and so forth. So they come back in the room and they said, there's a Saudi prince looking for somebody. I didn't pay any attention. And they came back a few minutes later and said, there is a Saudi prince looking for one of you. He said you're on the program. And I thought, well, that couldn't be I have a friend who's a Saudi prince.
Mm-hmm.
He's way up high, way up high. He could wind up being king one day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he could have been prior. He don't want any of that stuff. He's a big deal. And it's a long story how I got to be friends with him, but we're very close. And so they come back there and they called him by name.
Mm-hmm.
Said, Prince so-and-so. I thought, what is he doing here? And I invited him. I didn't think he'd come.
Mm-hmm.
He did. He came just for that event. Now, Saudi Arabia doesn't have the biggest human rights record. Did y'all know that?
I heard
Did
about
you know
some of this.
religious
about that.
freedom
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not
yeah.
a big deal in
It's
Saudi
not
Arabia?
high priority. No.
But he's the guy who challenged me in a small think tank many years ago. Bob, what you're doing with Muslims, you need to do it around the world, and you need to do it in America. And Michael, that's how we started those retreats. So I'm standing up there. So I walk out and I said, Your Highness, all the Muslims knew who he was. This guy's a big deal. And he said, where am I supposed to sit, Bob? So they had somebody's name beside me. I just threw it down real quick. I said, they want you right here, Your Highness. So we're sitting there, and I get ready
That's
to go
hilarious.
speak. And I told him, before I got up, I said, it means a lot to me that you came. And he said, I support you, Bob.
Wow.
And so anyhow, I'm standing there and I'm speaking. And something happens. And I go, in my heart, I acknowledged him. I said, this is the man that started it all for me. And I thought to myself while I was speaking, we preachers can do that sometimes. I love this guy. And then I think, I love this guy more than a lot of Christians I know.
Wow.
And then this third thought hits me that just wrecks me. I love this guy as much as any Christian I know. And my thought was, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Have I just sinned? I love a lost person as much as I love a Christian. And you know what I heard Jesus saying to me? Bob, for the first time in your life, you've loved the way that I want you to love. It changed everything.
Wow.
That's when I began to see people in the image of, do they need Jesus? Yes. Would I like to see him accept Christ? Yes. He actually came to my church one time and had to go get a seminary student because he wanted to see what a baptism looked like. So,
Which one do you have been baptized?
this is no joke. So we
man.
literally had a guy do baptism to watch. My point is, when you love people, you talk to them out of love. You just tell them what Jesus has done for you. It's not rocket science. Tell them what you know about Jesus.
Yeah.
That's all God expects you to do. He doesn't expect you to take a seminary course. The gospel spreads. By the way, you do know the gospel didn't spread in the early days of the church by backslidden Baptist and Methodist, unchurched people who'd quit going to church in the previous 5 years. I mean, it was people of other religions coming to faith in Christ. Why?
right.
Why were they giving up their religions? They were not dissatisfied with their religions. It was who Jesus was so radically different from anything they experienced. It rocked their world.
It's gold.
So I want to just touch on, at the very beginning, you described yourself as an evangelical who's not angry. And when we talk about it, and you talked a little bit about the social media piece and just like how it breaks your heart to see what pastors are saying on Twitter. And when we look at the nuns and the millennials, so many of whom have left the church and all the statistics about it, so much of what they're describing is a church that's the opposite of what you're describing as the right way to do church, right? Like, what would you? I'd like for you to maybe make a comment about evangelicalism. What's the problem? What do you see? It's like, man, if the church in America, the evangelical church in America looked like this instead of that.
So I wish you wouldn't ask me that. Stay with multifaith. I could get in a lot of trouble on this.
Okay.
But I'll answer because you asked me.
Because you don't care about
I
getting
really
into trouble.
don't. I'm 62, so what? And, I mean, I run with people that scare me to death, so there's not a lot.
Evangelicals don't have rocket launchers, so you shouldn't be too afraid.
Fine. So here's what I would say. Number one, the biggest problem, I think, is with us as pastors. We're broke. The evangelical pastorate is broke. It's broke. It's that simple. And what's happened, we've been driven by celebrityism. You know, everybody's building their platform. And I think the church is in the shape it is today because of the pastors, and I'm one of them. So I have to claim guilt along with everyone else. So I think we're tribal.
Yep.
We don't want to think. We don't want people to challenge us, you know. And so we've just given our minds to, we're afraid to disagree with our own tribe.
Uh-huh.
You know, I learned a long time ago, you start doing bridge building, all of a sudden you get shot in the rear from behind. You go, who did that? You know, I mean, you expect the shooting to come from in front. We want everybody to stay there. So I think the first thing is we've got to look at what does it mean to be a pastor. Here's the second thing. We have to ask ourselves, what's the church? And I don't mean theologically. I think there's great stuff on that. But how do we live in community? And basically, church has become the Sunday event. Everything is inside the building. And this is why I'm obsessed with public faith. This is how Paul lived it. This is how the church spreads around the world, by the way. You know, we like to say it's because of church planting. Most of the people who are planting those churches don't even know they're planting churches. They fall in love with Jesus. They're telling people about Jesus. And we write books and describe what they're doing and turn it into a machine. And I think, to me, that's tragic.
The Christian industrial complex.
It's big. We've got a whole industry, and it's horrible. And then I think the third thing is we've sold ourselves out to power, greed, and any other sin. And I think my heart is heavy. When was the last time you sat down and you listened to a pastor and the word when you heard them was profound? Doesn't have to be smart, but not 3 easy steps for a happy life or how to handle a stress world or when was the last time, you really fundamentally talked about life and what it means? I better shut up.
That's good.
Those are some things.
No, that's good.
It's gold.
Okay, well, I did steer us away from multi-faith for a moment, so I apologize for that.
It's all right.
Coming back to multi-faith, what are some of the things that are coming down the pike for you, things that you're wanting to do to help continue building these bridges?
Well, we've done retreats now in 15 cities. We're doing 3 retreats online right now. Right before I came here earlier today, I was online with Pittsburgh with pastors, imams, and rabbis. And so our goal is to be in about 50 cities. And so we get the pastor, the imam, the rabbi together to work together and to build the bridges. So that's number one. Number two, we're spreading out in different countries. So some of the really bad places in the world you hear about in the news, we're going into some of those places and we're doing that there. So that's a big deal. Another thing that I'm doing, I'm deep into fathering a lot of spiritual young guys in the ministry that I've helped. So I'm trying to teach them how to be diplomats, pastors, how to engage nations, going through the front door. Be honest about who you are. You'll go a lot farther. So that's a huge priority for me.
Aren't you starting a podcast up kind of soon?
Yeah, we are. We're calling it at this point Public Faith. And what I want to do is to talk about a lot of these crazy concepts. And then I'm friends with crazy people. And I just want to sit down with them with a microphone and say, okay, Ayatollah, let's talk about this stuff. I want to ask you 3 questions because I'm friends with some Ayatollahs, and I would love to sit down with them in their neck of the woods and just ask them questions Christians would be curious about. Yeah.
What does public faith mean for you when you use that phrase?
It means living your faith before people in a warm, ingratiating, respectful way. It's not carrying a placard. It's not, here's our positions.
Right. So I ask in part because I kind of expected you to say that, so I have a follow-up because it seems to me like what you're identifying as the problem is not the fact that we have exclusivist doctrine.
It's not.
If you ask somebody out in the world, they'll say, "Hey, the reason for all these problems is infighting these religions because of the exclusivist doctrine." And you're saying it's not the doctrine, it's the heart. Is that a correct way of wording it?
It is. So let me answer that by telling you a conversation I had today.
Okay.
With the retreat. We're doing it online. And so the rabbi says, the biggest problem I have with you Christians is y'all think that, we're incomplete without Christ. And he used a big term to describe that, supersessionism and so forth. And so
it's a cross-shaped hole.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. So he's going, so I deliberately dug a little bit deeper. I said, now let me ask you something. The Muslims that are here are just as exclusive as we, the Christians, exclusivists in their theology. But you said that about us. Now, why do you really say that? And he said, oh, Bob, because of centuries of persecution from Christians. And he starts going through it. And I told him, I said, so my friend, the truth of the matter is, it's not that you care what we believe. It's when we believe things that cause us to persecute you. And I would say it's not what we believe that causes us to persecute you. It's when our hearts are bad. And when our hearts are bad, it gives us any reason that we need to persecute somebody else, even if it's a Muslim or whatever. Because, by the way, Christians are more Islamophobic than any group in America, according to our own research. So that's how I I would answer it. People don't have a problem with exclusivist theology. And if you're kind, when I speak at all these public forums, and I stand up and say, yeah, I want to baptize all of you. And everybody dies laughing. I go, no, I really do. But here's the thing. Even if you don't want my Jesus, I'm going to love you guys. And I'm going to be your friend. And I'm going to work with you on this issue or whatever it is that we're gathered around. And here's the thing. Companies have corporate social responsibility. Organizations want to do humanitarian work. Guys, we're missing it by not being in the public square. Do you realize a lot of the ministry that we do, even for the city, is very arrogant and colonialistic? We show up. Oh, we're here to serve. What do you want us to do? We Christians are going to show everybody else what to do. Show up with the people who don't know Jesus. Yeah. You've just isolated yourself. The public square is not I'm going to start Christian ministry. My Christian ministry is to be present with you. I mean, do some stuff with some people who smell smoky. I mean, hang out with people who don't know Jesus. They're fun. Trust me, they're a lot funner than some Christians. I mean, they laugh. They're just enjoy life and just talk about Jesus.
That's good. That's good.
Cool. Well, so this conversation has brought a lot to mind as far as how we play this out, because I've always seen for sure the way that Christians amongst each other have poorly displayed the love of God. Right? It's one of the constant scriptures that we're bringing up on the show is that they're going to know our love, or they're going to know that we're followers of Christ for the love that we have for one another, and kind of extending this love to the world. Man, I'll be honest, especially when it comes to the subject of Islam, I probably have become as equally, I've committed the same sin that I am frustrated with my evangelical brothers for, but because it's pointed at a different religion, it's acceptable. It's interesting. So how do you navigate some of these waters? I mean, this is the talk about the pastorate, having been a part of the pastorate for at least a decade of my life. I've only heard Christians talk about Muslim persecution in third world countries. Our missionaries are over there, they're living, they're dying. You talk about how Christians are most Islamophobic group out there. Well, it's probably because every third week they're talking about the missionaries that are getting slaughtered in Middle Eastern countries, right? So how do we as Christians make sense of religious-based persecution while simultaneously maintaining the love for this religious-based group without becoming this? Because I don't see how fear and hate are inseparable in that regard. You know what I'm saying?
So Jesus dealt with that really good.
Okay.
Here's what he does. He says, love God, love your neighbor, love one another, love your enemies. And I think he was brilliant by saying that, not just because he was God, but because of what that does. You cannot love somebody and be their enemy. Mm. And I think what has to happen is it's not learning new information. Instead of that, it's more, okay, how am I going to show my love? How am I going to build that bridge? Because the majority of Muslims are not nutcases. Yeah. They're not. They have a different religion. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, none of the rest. Yeah. So I think what we have to do is, what does Jesus say? He says, you love your neighbor. Anybody can do that, somebody who does good. But what I want you to do, this is a Sermon on the Mount. This is kingdom stuff. I want you to love your enemy. Love those who persecute you. And so
Pastor's talking about persecution in the Middle East. How does he communicate that to his congregation while saying, hey, pray for our Christian brothers who are being persecuted, while simultaneously not indoctrinating, not brainwashing a group of people to be fearful and hateful towards another group of people that
So he's going to have to be in a relationship with an imam, okay, or with some Muslims. That's critical. Just standing up and speaking without benefit of most pastors don't even know a Muslim, let alone an imam. Yeah. And so when they get to knowing the imam, I mean, you said you were nervous, but then you loved it. You became this guy's friend.
It was awesome. It was so much fun.
Speaking it, yeah. And so that's the first thing. So when they see an imam come to your church, so I mean, we have events where we get halal food and we invite the Muslims to come to our church. And I let the Imams stand up and give the 5 pillars of Islam, and I stand up and I give the plan of salvation. You know, some people say, why would you do that? Well, why would I not do that? I mean, a lot of us are afraid, boy, if somebody might get converted, somebody may change their religion. Well, that just depends on how good you disciple your people. Don't blame their immaturity on you. You've got a responsibility to teach them the word. And you don't have to teach them all about Islam, but teach them what the truth is. So I would not back away from saying persecution is real. Here's what else I would say. There is some persecution that's overblown. And I learned this in working in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people, just like we preachers do hype, there's a lot of organizations.
The fish was this big.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, a lot of that has to do with persecution. I learned that from Vietnam. Vietnam, no doubt about it, one of the worst countries in the past of persecution. But a lot of things that was persecution, when you got deep in there, there was a whole lot more to it than that, without getting into that. So I think it's there. You should also know those extremist Muslims persecute more Muslims than they do any other group.
That's right, yeah. And
so you've got to give a historical context versus they're after Christians. No, those nutcases, they're after everybody. Yeah. So I think it's fine to talk about persecution and what they're doing, but we can talk about this on another podcast. I also believe the way we're engaging the world is very counterproductive.
Agreed. Yeah.
We're going around the world to do religious work. We don't need to.
Yeah.
We need to make disciples of everybody in all the domains of society and let them live that out wherever they are in the world. And, you know, I meet with world leaders that are Muslims all the time, and they ask me about Jesus and what I believe. And we sit up late at night when I'm in their homes or whatever, and they tell me stories from the Quran, and I tell them stories from the Bible. And I think you can't have a right impression of somebody based on 3-minute sound bites. I mean, if you're in the Middle East and you hear about Muslims being persecuted by white supremacists, you know, what in the world? Are you going to define all Christians by KKK and stuff like that?
Yeah.
But that's going to be in their news, and I think we've done that to them as well.
Bet you. Man.
Bob, for our viewers, just what would you say, like, hey, this is what you can do in response to our message today?
That's a great question. I think, number one, when you see somebody of a different faith, look at them and smile. Just not acknowledge them. If somebody lives near you, bake some cookies. You know, my wife had started a cooking club of Muslim and Jewish women. It's grown to multiple clubs. They now do community projects together. Just make some cookies and go down. Invite. If you're a man as well, you can do the same thing. You might, people that you work with. I would say build one relationship and affirm people. I'm a big believer in prayer. And I don't mean just I'm going to pray for people. I'm talking about praying all the time. So when I see somebody of a different faith, I'll ask them, hey, what's one thing I can pray for you about today?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And people that what if somebody says, I don't even know a Muslim. I don't even know a Hindu. So what would you say to somebody to kind of
I live in St. Elmo, Illinois.
I would say you probably do. You just don't realize it. And it may not be a Muslim. It could be a Hindu, or it could be a Baha'i, or it could be something else. You know, it really doesn't matter. Here's the question. Not what are you doing about Muslims? What are you doing about the people that live in your block, where you work, where you shop, where you go get tested for COVID? I mean, what about those people, and love those people? And look for people that are outliers. Look for the minority. Affirm them. Encourage them. You know, things are tough in America right now if you're a minority, be it racial or religious. Yeah. And I think, here's the thing. We as white American Christians, truthfully, sadly, we've got a sad history that we have to own up to, from slavery to Islamophobia to a lot of other things. I don't want my generation to leave this earth without doing everything it can to say, hey, we did some things wrong. We're going to start doing some things right. And I just think you look for the people that other people don't care about or they don't want to be seen with, and you love them. You love them.
That's good.
Man, that's great. Hey, thank you so much for coming on the
You
show.
bet.
It's an honor. How do people get in contact with you? How do they reach out to you? How do they get to your podcast? How do they check out your church? Those kinds of
Okay,
things.
so I'm on Twitter
Okay.
at Bob Roberts Jr.
Okay.
I'm on Instagram at Bob Roberts Jr. You can go to our website, clocal.net. You'll see some things there. You can Google Multi-Faith Neighbors Network and see some stuff there. We're going to have a new website called Bob Roberts Jr. that's coming up because we're trying to, all these speeches that I do all over the place and sermons and all
They're
this
all
public
localized.
square. Yeah, we're trying to get all that organized. And so you can contact me through any of the emails at those sites. I'll see it.
Cool.
So I encourage you to do it. Love a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or Baptist.
It's
but
your
love
homework this
somebody.
week.
Huh?
That's your homework this
That's
week.
right. That's your homework.
Love someone. That's good. Thank you so much for coming on. For those of you
Thank
who are
you.
watching the show, man, Monday night, 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time is our regular Monday night show. This week, we've got a lineup of multiple guests coming on the show. We've got William Lane Craig. We've got Jimmy Evans. And we also have John Thomas. We're talking about penal substitution, atonement. We're talking about, I was going to try to abridge that, and then I abridged it in the wrong place. Penal substitutionary atonement, we're going to be talking about the pre-trib rapture. We're going to be talking about something with John Thomas that I haven't quite
something
ironed out.
wonderful,
It's
though.
going to be fabulous. So we will see you guys later on this
After
week.
if you subscribe. If you subscribe.
Why, thank you.
Yes.
That was such a nice way to say
You
subscribe.
forgot your little line,
like
too.
the video
There
if
you
you
go.
liked it. Dislike the button twice if you disliked it. And go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Have a great night, guys.
Peace.
All right.